And what they will almost certainly do is if a player goes down to injury, they will wait. They will wait until 3 players go down with injury, and then they will start calling up hardship players, because they would rather not call up a dev player to fill in an injury, and they would rather wait until they have so few players they can call up a random washed vet from the street.
This isn't an exaggeration. It's the reality of the Indiana Fever heading into 2025. The roster has a handful of players who can genuinely compete at a championship level, but the overall depth still raises serious concerns. And at this point, the conversation goes beyond simple roster depth. It's about organizational vision, front office strategy, and whether Indiana is truly committed to maximizing its championship window around Caitlin Clark. Because here's what makes this situation so important. The Fever arguably possess one of the most exciting young cores the WNBA has seen in years. Caitlin Clark has already established herself as one of the league's elite guards. Aliyah Boston continues to develop into a dominant two-way star who could soon enter MVP conversations. And Kelsey Mitchell remains one of the purest scorers in professional basketball. Having 3 all-star level talents under the age of 26 is the kind of foundation most franchises dream about. But championship opportunities don't stay open forever. The Seattle Storm and Minnesota Lynx are reminders of how quickly things can change in professional sports. Injuries, contracts, roster changes, and league expansion completely alter a team's future in just a few seasons. Right now, Indiana is operating within a rare window where they still have Caitlin Clark on a rookie contract, giving them flexibility to build aggressively around her before the financial realities of superstar status eventually arrive. And that's why every roster decision the Fever make right now feels incredibly important for the future of this franchise.
Scores in the league, and I mean it. Could be an old WNBA player again this year. Yeah, MHA. On her contract, an absolute bargain. She does some crazy shit. She does some great shit. Is it a player now where the Fever have the luxury of benching her if she starts doing mad shit? The Fever have that luxury, whereas the Dallas Wings didn't last year. They didn't have the depth to, when she thought she was Giannis, take her off the floor. The Fever.
Let's start with what's actually working for the Indiana Fever, because this is where roster construction becomes really interesting. Arik Ogunbowale is the perfect example of how context can completely change the way a player is viewed. Last season with the Dallas Wings, she was asked to carry almost the entire offense on her shoulders. She had to create her own shots, take difficult attempts late in possessions, and play heavy minutes because Dallas simply didn't have enough consistent offensive creators around her. When she got hot, the Wings could compete. When her shot selection became reckless or inefficient, the team still had no choice but to live with it because they depended on her that heavily. But in Indiana, the situation would be completely different. The Fever wouldn't need her to dominate every possession or force hero ball basketball. Instead, her role would become much simpler and potentially far more effective. Knock down tough shots when defenses collapse on Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston, provide instant offense, and capitalize on the attention those stars create. That's a much cleaner basketball fit. And maybe the biggest difference of all is accountability. If Arik Ogunbowale starts forcing bad shots or drifting into inefficient habits, Stephanie White would actually have the luxury of pulling her from the floor, because Indiana already has multiple offensive weapons. Dallas rarely had that option. That's what smart roster building is supposed to look like. It's not just about collecting talent. It's about understanding roles, fit, and how certain players perform in different environments. Sometimes a player who struggles in one system can suddenly become a championship-level piece simply because the expectations and responsibilities around them change.
League, and I mean it. Could be an old WNBA player again this year. Yeah, MHA. On her contract, an absolute bargain. She does some crazy shit. She does some great shit. Is it a player now where the Fever have the luxury of benching her if she starts doing mad shit? The Fever have that luxury, whereas the Dallas Wings didn't last year. They didn't have the depth to, when she thought she was Giannis, take her off the floor.
Raven Johnson represents exactly the kind of smart decision-making the Indiana Fever needed in the draft. At the 10th pick, most franchises usually chase raw upside. Athletic players, risky scorers, are prospects with tools that might take years to fully develop. But Indiana took a different approach. They selected a player who already understands how to contribute to winning basketball right now. Johnson doesn't force the game, doesn't try to play outside her strengths. and consistently makes the small winning plays that championship teams depend on. At first glance, that style may not sound flashy, but it makes perfect sense for a roster built around Caitlin Clark. Clark is naturally going to dominate the ball, create offense, and control the pace of the game. What the Fever need around her are players who can thrive without constant touches, players who move well off the ball, run the floor in transition, cut intelligently, defend at a high level, and knock down open shots when opportunities appear. That's exactly where Johnson fits. She's already shown promise as a perimeter shooter, hitting around 38% from three in limited opportunities while also establishing herself as one of the stronger defensive guards in her draft class. But maybe her biggest strength is the fact that she doesn't need the offense built around her to make a major impact on winning. And for a player selected 10th overall to potentially compete for meaningful minutes, or even a starting role on a playoff caliber team in her rookie season, that's tremendous value. Those are the types of draft decisions that quietly extend championship windows for years.
Aliyah, best centre in the league if you consider age at power forward. Second best centre in the league if you consider age at centre. One of the 10 best players in the league. I have her projected to be one of the 5 best players in the league this year. She might be the best player on this team. You don't hate that. Like, that's not a crazy statement to make. Sophie Cunningham, shooter. Decent enough defender, shooter. Connected piece. Perfect player to have on a pretty good contract. Lexie Hull. She better start hitting shots. And this is the one thing that really annoys me when people talk about Lexie Hull. They're like, oh, her 3-point percentages have been good. Lexie Hull has prolonged hot streaks and prolonged cold streaks. Like, she goes through 10-game periods where she shoots 60% from 3. And then she'll go through 10-game periods where she shoots 16% from 3. Like, it is just prolonged hot streaks and prolonged cold streaks for Lexie. There is... The only thing that is consistent about her game is her effort. The effort is there and the effort is spectacular. I got to give credit where credit's due. The effort's absolutely spectacular for Lexie Hull. And that is the one thing, the only consistency in Lexie Hull's game.
Now we get to one of the biggest question marks on the Indiana Fever roster, Lexie Hull, because the conversation surrounding her has started to drift away from reality. A lot of people point to her 39% three-point shooting last season and automatically label her as a dependable shooter, but percentages alone don't always tell the full story. The real issue with Hull isn't whether she can shoot, it's the inconsistency of when those shots fall. She doesn't simply go through a bad night here and there. Her production swings dramatically for long stretches. Last season, there were periods where she struggled badly from three-point range over multiple games, followed by short bursts where she suddenly caught fire and raised her overall numbers back to respectable levels. The concern is that in high-pressure playoff situations, teams need role players who provide steady, reliable spacing every single night, not players whose offensive impact can disappear for extended stretches. To be fair, Hull absolutely brings value defensively. Her effort level, hustle, and commitment are never questioned. She competes hard, plays with energy, and gives Indiana toughness on the perimeter. But when a player's primary offensive responsibility is floor spacing and outside shooting, long scoring droughts become difficult to ignore. Especially in the playoffs, where rotations tighten and every possession matters, opponents will aggressively help off players they don't fully trust to make shots consistently. That's what makes Indiana's investment in her development such an important conversation. The Fever continue giving her meaningful minutes because they believe in the overall package she brings. But eventually the organization has to decide whether that role is best used on a player with a more stable offensive floor. Because championship basketball becomes brutally unforgiving once the postseason begins, and teams cannot afford weak spots that opposing defenses feel comfortable ignoring.
Fever team. Solid 1 through 7, I guess. Very, like, they have a championship.
The Indiana Fever clearly have the talent to compete for a championship. Caitlin Clark is already one of the best guards in basketball. Aliyah Boston keeps improving every season, and Kelsey Mitchell can explode offensively at any moment. Add in players like Nalissa Smith, Lexie Hull, Raven Johnson, and Awak Choir, and Indiana's top 7 can match up with almost anyone in the WNBA. The chemistry and potential are absolutely there. The concern is the roster depth behind them. Many fans believe the bottom part of the roster still lacks reliable contributors, and that becomes dangerous during a long season where injuries and fatigue are unavoidable. Right now, it feels like Indiana is relying heavily on its stars staying healthy instead of building the kind of deep roster true championship teams usually need. And that's why this season feels so important. The Fever have a rare championship window while Caitlin Clark is still on a rookie contract, but those opportunities don't last forever in professional sports. The talent to win is already in place. Now the question is whether the organization is willing to make the aggressive moves necessary to fully maximize it before that window starts to close.